In some respects, Shabbat is a sanctuary. It is a day for us to be able to feel a certain tranquility. But Shabbat was never, ever meant to be an escape from what's going on in the world. If anything, it's an opportunity for us to reflect deeply on what's going on in the world. And of course, we are all afraid and heartsick at what is taking place in Ukraine, an escalation of violence, innocent Ukrainians, men, women, and children being murdered, millions leaving Ukraine as refugees, and many, many more trying to leave. I spoke last week about our moral obligation to support the Ukrainian people in several ways, our moral obligation unequivocally to call out an unprovoked attack by Russia on a sovereign nation. And this week, I want to dig a little bit deeper. I want to talk a little bit about the history of Ukraine, specifically how it has impacted the Jewish people. And the question is, what impact should the history have on what we do or do not do today? It's important, I think, to look at this, to be thoughtful, and to determine what we want to do in the present. We are asked to remember the past. The Jewish people specifically urge the remembering of the past, not so that we can dwell on the past, but so that we can face the present with our eyes open. This week is Shabbat Zachor. This is the week of remembering. We are asked to remember what Amalek did to the children of Israel when we were leaving Egypt. And what did they do? They attacked us from behind, and they attacked the most innocent first. Those who were in the back were the most innocent, the most vulnerable. This remembering is supposed to echo across the generations. And so in each generation, you have various incarnations of Amalek. The Haftarah that Zach read is about what happened generations after the Amalekites attacking the Israelites. And they were still at war. And Saul, King Saul, was at war with King Agag of the Amalekites. Generations after that, we're coming up, of course, on the holiday of Purim, Haman, a descendant of the Amalekites, sought to destroy the Jewish people. And Mordechai is actually a descendant of King Saul. So the conflict continues in ways that are personal and also national in significance. And it also continues in modern times as well. Right before he was executed, in 1946, Julius Streicher, Nazi leader, founder of Die Stürmer, which was the leading anti-Semitic newspaper that the Nazis used as part of their propaganda machine, right before he was executed, he turned to the witnesses that bore witness against him, and he said to them, Purim feast, 1946. He knew the history. He knew that he was a modern day Haman. He understood what that moment meant. And so this is a very powerful motif in Jewish tradition. We are supposed to remember, to blot out, to not forget those who attack without mercy in order to destroy because of who you are. So, remembering the past is supposed to help us to face the present. But how do you know who is Amalek and who is not? And what do you do with the descendants of those who perpetrated atrocities, but who themselves are not perpetrators and who may in fact denounce the actions of their ancestors? What do you do about the possibility of situations changing and possibly even improving? So back to Ukraine. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, the Jewish people have a tortured past in Ukraine. This is not something that should be forgotten. The Jewish people have a tortured past. Hundreds of thousands before the Shoah were killed in pogroms. Over 1 million Jews of Ukrainian origin were killed during the Shoah. Recently, J.J. Goldberg, famous journalist, indicated in an article that two of Ukraine's greatest heroes are two of the greatest villains to the Jewish people. Bogdan Khmelnytsky led the Cossacks in revolt against the Poles in 1648. He is considered a hero by the Ukrainians. There are statues of him all over Ukraine. Still to this day, there is a statue in Kiev, and people go there and they show their respect to arguably the founder of the Ukrainian nation. In 1917, Simon Petliura was defense minister and later president of the Ukrainian People's Republic. And so there are statues of these men all over Ukraine. They are heroes, but both of them led pogroms against the Jewish community on their way to liberating Ukraine. Khmelnytsky directly and very intentionally, Petliura arguably less so, but this resulted in the killing of hundreds of thousands of people. Zachor al tishkach, remember, don't forget. So what do you do with that? I'm bringing this up because we need to consider this. We can't ignore, but we also need to figure out how to face the present by virtue of our mindfulness of the past. The statues are still up, and yet Ukraine has elected an openly Jewish president who is acting heroically now by any measure, and yet the Ukrainians alive today are not the ones who slaughtered Jews or who turned them over to the Nazis. Remember the past so that you face the present. How does that work now? It would be a travesty, I believe, to argue that Ukrainians today, Jewish and of all faiths, should be ignored by Jews because of the way that many Jews were treated over the centuries in Ukraine. Ukrainians are facing a humanitarian crisis. Innocent people are being killed by the thousands, Jews and non-Jews alike. And Jews and non-Jews have a moral responsibility to speak out and to offer support. Remembering the past doesn't mean that it has to apply 100%. It means that you face the present with your eyes open. There are situations that require a reconsideration of how it is that we move and act in the world. And of course, we as a synagogue have sent out numerous messages urging people to provide support to those organizations that are providing relief on the ground, because this is a humanitarian disaster that is getting worse. Remembering the past invites us to consider how the present is the same, but also how it's different. And here are two differences. One, the Ukrainian people are different. Ukraine is different as a nation than it was over the centuries. And two, the Jewish people are different. We have Medinat Yisrael now. We have a state that is a source of strength and pride, and Israelis are reaching out and offering sanctuary to Ukrainians, not just to Jewish Ukrainians. So I want to share a beautiful statement by Natan Sharansky, and then I will conclude. Natan Sharansky grew up in Ukraine. Natan Sharansky was imprisoned by the Russians. He wrote a magnificent autobiography. Buy it, take it out of the library, called Fear No Evil. He is truly a hero for the Jewish people. And here's what he said. He said, when I was growing up in Ukraine, everybody had to write their national identities on their official documents. So when I was growing up, you could write Cossack, you could write Russian, you could write Ukrainian, didn't matter. Nobody cared. Didn't make a difference one way or the other. But if you wrote Jew, that meant you had very little likelihood of getting into university. That meant that you had very little likelihood of landing certain jobs. Jew was the worst thing that you could possibly write. So he said this week, I was reminded of those days when I saw thousands of people standing at the borders of Ukraine trying to escape. They're standing there day and night, and there is only one word that can help them get out, and that's the word Jew. If you are a Jew, it means that there are Jews outside who care about and are waiting for you. There is someone on the other side of the border who is searching for you. Your chances of leaving are excellent. The world has changed. When I was a child, Jew was an unfortunate designation. No one envied us. But today, on the Ukrainian border, identifying as a Jew is a most fortunate circumstance. It describes those who have a place to go, where their family, an entire nation, is waiting for them on the other side. Natan Sharansky. Now, Israelis are there. They are not asking a lot of questions of people who are looking to leave. They are not checking ancestry. They are providing sanctuary for those who want to leave. We need to remember the past. We need to understand what has not changed. We also need to be mindful of what has changed. Toward the end of his life, Moses shared a final song with the people, and he said, Zachor yemot olam binu shenot dor vador. Remember the days of old, consider the years from one generation to another. The rabbis love to play with language. They said instead of shenot dor vador, the years, they said consider shinuye dor vador. Consider the changes from one generation to another. We have to remember our own suffering. We have to remember our Amalek moments. We have to defend ourselves robustly against all descendants of Amalek. And we have to also consider that much has changed. We have more agency than we used to. We have a state that is robust and strong. We can and must provide advocacy and support to those innocent people who are in need. On this Shabbat Zachor, let's remember our past carefully, so we can apply it clearly and carefully to the frightening and critical present. Shabbat Shalom.